So basically, I think it was a string of events that began way back in 1979, even way before I was born, and that led us that was sort of around the Soviet invasion and the fall of the Afghan monarchy. And my family, on both my father and mother's side, they were heavily involved in, the monarchy at the time. They worked with, directly either through the army or through international relations. My grandfather was involved. He was also an engineer. It just became a little dangerous for everybody, after the Soviets, then the fall of the monarchy, creating an Islamic Republic, and then the Taliban. It was one thing after the next that ultimately caused many of my family members to either relocate to America or Europe. And we actually went to Pakistan in Islamabad because it was, a neighbor. And so I think at the time, my family was under the belief that, we will return. So the Taliban invaded the first time, and they were thinking that, okay, we'll just go to Islamabad for like a few years and then we'll just go back home. But, obviously things got even worse. And so I ended up being born in Islamabad. So I wasn't even born in Afghanistan. And then from there, my grandfather had gone to school in America, college, and, did a lot of work with the United States. And so he already had met a lot of family members here, and between Europe and America, it just seemed like a more comfortable decision for him, for the family, and just, he was already pretty well acclimated with the culture here, so it made sense for us to come here. A significant connection. Our family, I think that's what I'm so grateful for. I spoke Farsi, Dari, Hindi, all since I could, I learned them all kind of at the same time. And language, firstly, would be the most important way to stay connected. And my family really reinforced that. So at home, we would speak a lot of Farsi more than English because they were like, well, you're going to speak English in school, so it's better to try to keep it Farsi at home so that you don't lose that, language ability. And then from there, we celebrated all the holidays, very much immersed in the culture. I grew up eating primarily Afghan food, kebab and rice and naan and all of those things, and I still really only eat that at home. We have the occasional pizza night and wings and stuff like that, but it is primarily Afghan food. And all of my niece is growing, she's 2, and she's also, she began eating rice pretty early on. So it's just so natural to us. So food is a big part of it as well. We're like this big Italian family. Yeah. We have a lot of family here, basically all my family is here. And so I grew up with them, and it was, our dinner table conversations were very unique because of my grandfather's work in the past, and my mom was a war crimes prosecutor as well, so she, had a lot to add to the conversation. And so I grew up hearing a lot of stories and, so much about Afghanistan and seeing pictures as well. And then I was able to go when I was 11. So that was, I think, either 2007 or 2008. And things were, I think at the time, that was maybe the height of suicide bombings around those years. It wasn't necessarily just because the Taliban had left prior to when we got there, so they weren't really prevalent in the area. But what was happening is that Al-Qaeda was, I think, doing suicide bombings or whatever else. Maybe other groups, but overall it was very peaceful. I found it to be really, a great, enjoyable experience. But as a child especially, I think the way the architecture is over there, it's very different. Like, if you're privileged enough, the homes there are just, you have a courtyard or like a pool in the middle of the house. It's very, I thought it was so cool because, our homes here are nothing like that. So I wanted to stay, actually. I didn't want to come back, which I'm very grateful for, because it is, you feel a connection, and I'm glad that I was able to make that connection, even though I wasn't born there. we went to the valley, so Panjshir Valley. It's up in northern Afghanistan, and it's a very beautiful location, very green, and it has the bluest water, and my dad's family is actually from there, and we got to go back. We have our ancestral homes there, so it was almost like people usually have their weekend trips there. It's kind of like a little outing location, and so we got to go there. And I think more than just that, my initial reaction to Afghanistan was really interesting as an 11-year-old, because getting off the plane, I really, like, it's weird to say because as a child, these things you don't think that, you know, I would feel this connection because I was like an American 11-year-old, you know, what would I know? I really felt a difference. Like, just the feeling of, we got off on the tarmac and you see the mountains the first thing, you know, and obviously there's a lot of dust and smoke when you're getting off the plane. Pollution is pretty bad over there. But beyond that, I was very struck by the feeling of just, it feels like home. It does. It's weird. And this is home too. But that felt like you can almost, it's like an ancestral connection. Like, this is where I really come from. And I think a lot of people don't have the privilege to know exactly where they come from. And I do, you know, and you don't have to go through like those ancestry, like DNA testing to find out exactly which countries you're from. I love that I myself wasn't even born here, so I'm very connected. And I think hopefully for future generations, we can instill the same values. And, you know, so far, I think my family has done a great job, because even my cousins that were born in America, they feel a great amount of, you know, they feel very connected to their country, and I hope we can continue that and move forward with that as, you know, everyone has kids and all that. Yes, I mean, so with our family, I think that it's good to, for me, my whole life, I've always tried to make sure that people know that my level of education or my interest in pursuing a higher education is not as a result of westernization. It's because I come from a family that's very highly educated, you know, doctors, engineers, lawyers, and that is even before we moved out of the country. So that was a huge point of, you know, what my parents and my grandparents instilled in us, is that, you know, we come from this line of so many amazing people, and you have to also pursue the same here, although we're not still back home. And they used to kind of, it was very organic. There was never really like, oh, I want you to know more about, read these books or watch these videos. It was like everyday life, you know, although we were removed from Afghanistan, Afghanistan was still a part of my daily life. And it came up every day, basically. Well, firstly, I think it's more synonymous with the third world country than it is with, you know, the resilience of the people. I think more so people don't realize that Afghans, they come from, you know, a very destructive and, you know, it's a difficult history that, you know, obviously over decades, maybe centuries, it's just been a point of conflict just because of primarily its geographic location. So there's always been fighting over conquering Afghanistan. So unfortunately for generations, we've had to face that. And something that I've found very important is, through my life, I've always made sure to bring up that I'm Afghan as quickly as I can in a conversation when I meet someone, because when they meet me, it helps them better understand that, oh, okay, so Afghans are educated, or they are just like the average American. I am an American too, but it takes away from the idea that we all look and act a certain way that sometimes can be portrayed in the news. You don't get to see the beauty of the country. You don't really get to see the education levels, what Afghans are doing around the world. You hardly get to see that. So you almost think, oh, it's just a third world. They don't really have a lot of money. They don't do much. They don't excel. But I mean, I'm, you know, here because of the generations before me and what I was taught through them. It wasn't as a result of being in America that I decided to pursue law. So I think that's the most important for me, is for people not to assume this like thing about, oh, these people are savages. Oh, they can't sit at a dinner table with like a fork and a knife and that kind of stuff, you know? And I think it's important to put that in there, that I'm very much connected to my culture while also being able to assimilate in American society. So. The thing that we have that causes the greatest amount of conflict is the internal divide. So there's a lot of ethnic groups in Afghanistan, and there's just so much, there's amount of division between those groups that we can never really come together. But throughout history, you can see when things get really rough, and when, you know, I would say primarily the Soviet invasion would be a good example, people will put aside their differences. So it's against the third enemy that Afghans tend to come together. You know, they'll fight forever amongst themselves. But when a third party comes in and, you know, they're trying to invade the country, they do know how to get together and resist. And I know that they call it the graveyard of empires. And I don't know how I feel about that title necessarily, because although no one has been able to technically conquer Afghanistan, putting that tag of the graveyard of empires is not really fair, because it's also a land of dreams for so many people. So what about all those people that are collateral damage? So the land may not be conquered, but so many people still lose their lives. And I think that the resistance is, it's unimaginable how they continue to fight. And unfortunately, things are very different from when my dad was, you know, I think assisting in like political rebellion and that kind of stuff. These people were born in war. So literally from day one, my parents, they didn't see that, you know, and in the beginning of their life, at least the first 15 to 20 years, their country was at peace. So it's hard now for the newer generations, because they never saw a peaceful Afghanistan. So they just have seen destruction and poverty. And I think it's harder to mobilize the youth now than it was at my dad's time. I think it was a matter of days, honestly. Did not expect it to happen, and I think everyone will tell you that at the drop of a hat, honestly. I think I heard about the troops leaving, but I just didn't realize that it would be in such a hasty way. I just assumed, because, you know, obviously I felt encouraged that President Biden was, you know, in charge. And I thought maybe this would be a new page for Afghan-American relations, but unfortunately I was really disappointed with the pullout. And it seemed just completely unnecessary and unprovoked to do it in that manner. I think it's important to say that, right, the troops could not have been there forever. I do agree with that, and I think people quickly will assume that we wanted them to always stay there, but that's not the case. I think having maybe up to 1,000 troops even, because I know we have them based in Japan as well, you know, and nothing is really happening. But if it keeps the peace, why not keep a couple hundred troops there, you know? To me, it was sudden. It put everyone in danger. It put troops in danger. It put civilians in danger. And it was a mess. And it played out internationally. For those like 2 to 3 weeks, the world was watching. And I think it really put America in a bad position. And it was a bit embarrassing, I think. I think that starting from that first week in August, what I've been saying till now is that, you know, although our focus is on resettlement, which I, you know, appreciate so much, we're very grateful for the American response. And I will say that the community in Jacksonville, especially, they have stepped up so much to welcome, you know, refugees, and the donations. I mean, my car was overflowing with the amount of stuff people were, you know, I was picking it up from their homes, they were dropping it off to me. I was very shocked, just pleasantly surprised by the response of the community. But I still want to circle back to the idea that there are 38 million other people that, you know, didn't get to leave. The solution isn't necessarily to resettle and relocate, because there's always going to be millions more left. So I think the focus should be on, and I don't think maybe the average person can do anything in this regard. It would have to be the American government, but to continue the conversation about what the plan is for sanctions, maybe about the surrounding countries that are intervening. You know, there's a lot of political intricacies that are going into what's going on, and whether this was an invasion or whatever it may be, I think the focus should be on the civilians that are still on the ground there, because they have to continue their lives. So what can we do? And I think a huge issue that my family and I faced during the second Taliban invasion this year was the inability to send money. So they had like Western Union was not sending money to Afghanistan. So people were literally starving. There was nothing, and they had not been paid for months. So it's basically more than a dangerous situation. Now it's become an economic crisis. I think everyone was more focused at the time when the Taliban invaded that, oh, they're going to be torturing people, they're going to be killing women, they're gonna, there was a lot of things swirling around. And the reality is, most of that didn't even happen, but people are starving because there's no money and they haven't been able to get things back in order, the new regime, So it's like, now that you've conquered, what's next? There has been virtually no plan. And the airport, I don't think it's fully operational yet. So these are like big things that need to be discussed on an international level. And I think the UN, and they really, I think, disappointed people, because obviously you can't babysit a country, but the reality is Afghanistan didn't become what it became unilaterally. It was as a result of foreign invasion. So I think it is our responsibility to clean up some of the mess that we made. Yes, I think at this point, beyond the average person can for sure donate and just reach out to those refugees resettled in your own community. And I think Lutheran Services does a great job with that. So the average person can help in that way and try to donate what they can. If it's not money, if it's, household items, you can do that. But on a bigger scale, it does have to be international aid, and we need some kind of foreign backing coming from the big five, and I think the problem with the administration now is that they're not really addressing what happened, and I think the president kind of swept it under the rug after about 30 days, and what about the people that assisted the military, the SIV families? No one's talking about them, and there's still American citizens left in Afghanistan. They've been there for months, and this was a crisis created by us. If we had just waited, I think, a few more months, dragged it out so that we could at least be prepared, this would have been entirely avoidable, which is what makes it so difficult to grasp, I think, because as a superpower in the world, I know we had the capability to do this in a better way and execute it in a more informed and, it almost felt like every day they were just kind of reading their horoscope or something and making decisions. That's what it seemed like the president was doing, and not using any kind of advice from any of the people around him or listening to anybody. Because I know other politicians were asking for aid or asking for the sanctions to be lifted so money could be sent, but none of that was happening. It just took too long. But now we can, which I'm grateful for. So now it's been, I think, about 2 months or so, or a month maybe, that money can be sent. And there is sort of a restriction about how much you can send, but it is being sent. So I think that's a huge amount of progress that we've made so far. Yes, so I think that my main reason, beyond, I think everyone, usually it comes from wanting to help people getting into this field, hopefully, I hope. But I think my mom, because she was a prosecutor growing up, I knew she was an attorney, and I really was inspired by that. And I think my grandfather's work as well, he was involved in politics as well, and in some ways he was an engineer, but did other diplomatic relations stuff. I think it just seemed like the best way to get reconnected with my country without necessarily leaving and trying to, it just doesn't seem feasible to kind of relocate now that we've been here for almost 23 years. I think I still wanted to find a way to help the Afghan people, and in the most productive way possible, because donations can only do so much. So I always thought my main reason for being an attorney was to go into the human rights field and to do work directly impacting women and children, and even the men, honestly. It's hard to get into that space, I think, early on. So right now, I'm really happy with the work that I'm doing, but I'm hoping that a lot of the pro bono side of it, I can do international work with my free time. There are ways to send money, and it's kind of like now they've called it a link tree, and I think you can do that with various organizations where you put multiple links under one link, and I have that in my social media. They basically give you like 10 to 12 options. Some people like to donate through smaller organizations because, sometimes they don't trust the bigger ones to allocate the money properly. So I personally have, different links that can, assist people on the ground over there. And that's kind of the only way right now for your average citizen to send money over there. But even then, I feel like there's only so much one person can do. So I try to maybe steer it towards the refugees that are here. And if you maybe without donating, you can, as long as you show them some kind of like welcome them, that's what really helps, because you're already in a foreign place, and I think for them it's definitely a huge culture shock. So what you can really ask from the Jacksonville community right now is just be open-minded and be kind and offer a helping hand before you offer an opinion, because I think a lot of people became foreign policy experts in August, and so I think a lot of it, I wanted to say that just, listen more than adding to the conversation. Just listen to Afghans about Afghanistan. Ask Afghans about Afghanistan than, a foreign correspondent or something. It's a weird feeling. I think you have survivor's guilt in a way. And I think the Afghan diaspora, the experience, for those in their 20s and 30s, it's a very different experience, because you've seen, like, my parents at least had that time. My grandparents lived amazing lives. So they had like the golden era of Afghanistan. They lived during that time, and I'm so envious of them. And my parents got a little sliver of it, in their early life. So they got to see it in peace. And unfortunately for us, those in our 20s and 30s, we have never seen our country at peace. And sometimes the regret isn't that we relocated, because I'm privileged to have been able to do that. So I'm grateful. I have a lot of gratitude for being here, and for being it's, I think, pure luck to have been born in the family that I was, that they had the means to leave, because there could be another 25-year-old out there right now who could be 10 times the attorney I am, except she's in like a refugee camp or living in, a million different kinds of awful conditions that if she had the opportunity that I did, she might have excelled even more. So that always gets to me, and I always wonder, like, do I deserve this opportunity, and what can I do with it? So it's not necessarily regret, it's kind of guilt, I would say. It's synonymous with guilt, and a lot of us, you don't realize, I think, how much it has impacted you until things like August happened with the invasion. That's when you could feel the pain. Everybody felt it, and a lot of us had to seek, mental health counseling, because it was hard to put into words the feeling of having to get up and go to work and act completely normal. But meanwhile, your country has been invaded by what is known as like a terrorist regime, and you don't know what's going to happen next, and you have families still there. So we were still fully going through the daily motions of normal life, which I think is not normal to do, when you're in that kind of mental anguish. I mean, we were up all the time because the 8-hour difference. So it was like I was trying to get news from Afghan BBC because it was like covering exactly what was happening on the ground while trying to manage the American time as well. So I would be awake at night trying to get the news, and I know my parents were too. And that was the case in millions of Afghan homes across the world, because the only way we knew what was going on was either maybe through family, if you could get connected, or through the news that was coming in. And that was a really difficult time. And I think that was the first time for my generation where we were like, oh wow, okay, so this really has impacted our life in every way. And you try to ignore it, and we're not ones to, I think, seek sympathy a lot. I think the Afghan community should do that more. We try to maintain a really tough exterior until you just can't anymore, and I think that's not healthy. And sometimes you should say that, hey, like, we do feel bad, you know, and sometimes the perception that they have of our country, you try to laugh it off and stuff like that. Oh, you know, it's not true, this is not that, or people make jokes and you try to not be too sensitive to it, but after a while it takes a toll on you, and I think the news takes a toll on you because you can only be so numb to it. There will be a point where it kind of does break you down a bit, and I think that's what happened with August, because we tried to be, Afghanistan has been in war for like over 20 years now, and we were desensitized to it, and it's our own country. So I think I can't blame Americans for kind of ignoring the whole thing, because if we could do it, if we could almost, because it was too hard to deal with, and I think that's what we do as humans. Like August happened, and you could no longer ignore it, and it was right there on the front page on every news channel every single day at all hours, and that's when it really became difficult. I think that for me, it's doing stuff like this and speaking to news outlets or reporters or journalism classes. I'm like, well, who am I to be doing this? You know, I feel a little guilty doing it, because I'm like, well, I'm sitting here in my privilege commenting on a situation that I have never even really lived through. And there are people living through it, you know, where it's poverty, or they haven't been paid in months, or they can't even go to school. But I'm sitting here in my office in this law firm, and I live a very privileged life. So sometimes it becomes difficult to be commenting on that kind of a situation. But then I try to remind myself that through the articles that I've done or through the interviews that I've given, that's reached many people. And so I think the response I've received, it helps me kind of understand that doing this is necessary to help bridge that gap between understanding Afghans, you know, and what the average American doesn't know. They can maybe hopefully have a better understanding through, I guess, reading an article that I did, or, you know, watching an interview, because I think it's easier for them to see someone that looks and dresses like them and comes from that country, or is of this certain level of education, to be like, oh, okay, so wait, these people are actually just like us, you know? And that's what it's about. We're all way more similar than we are different. And then that's what I hope to, I think, achieve through all of this, and for people to understand that immigration built this country. And my family and I, along with hundreds of other Afghan families that I know, we haven't used a cent of the government, you know, since day one. We worked really hard, and, you know, we came here with all of our degrees or whatever else, and we worked really hard. So everything we have, we've earned, and we have never lived off the American government. We've only given back to it, actually. So I hope that the American people realize that.